moving on to discussion and/or decision, item A, S15, 463, 78 Cranberry Road, Special Properties 2 LLC, construction of a 15-unit conservation development in and adjacent to the wetlands and the watercourses.
Okay, so you put up public hearing on this application. Closed at your last meeting on July 14th. It's initial discussion at your, following the close of public hearing. And at the end of that discussion, you indicated that you had, would review the materials that you've been given and have some additional discussion this evening. Right. Some guidance to staff for drafting a resolution. I did bring all of the boards and displays from the public hearing. If you want to look at any of those, just ask. Most of them are stacked here. There's one over there, and there are additional on the table.
Right. So, does anyone want to have any comments about this?
You know, one thing that we were talking about last time is the easement for the transmission lines.
Yes.
And it doesn't, in looking through the material I have, I don't see where that, I mean, it shows the transmission line going through there, but it doesn't show the boundary of the easement for the, for that transmission line easement. Which, the thing about that transmission line easement, you know, I don't know if it precludes building homes there, but it, you know, we were talking about it last time, it certainly requires maintenance of the landscape in there. It requires trimming and pruning, and it looks to me like it's not really developable land. I don't know if you've built houses under transmission lines or not, but you know, so all that land that is currently under a transmission line easement, is being proposed to go into this conservation easement. And it seems a little bit duplicitous that, you know, it's land that probably wouldn't be developed otherwise is being tossed into this conservation easement so that they can achieve their 15-home objective. And you know, every little bit of land that could be put into the conservation easement is being done so that they get to their 15 homes. And you know, that's what that conservation easement is about getting the maximum number of houses on this piece of property as possible. So, you know, a lot of the conservation easement is, you know, wetlands or buffers, property buffers, some of the upland review area of the wetlands that fall under our jurisdiction and protection regardless. And then you've got this the biggest swath of the whole thing is already power line easement, which they haven't delineated how much of that space is part of that transmission line. I don't know what the acreage of the transmission line easement is. That info wasn't provided as far as I know. So my point is that almost all of the conservation easement is not developable land anyway. So if you, and the point of a conservation easement is that if we're going to reward them with more homes to develop, we're going to do that in return for taking developable land and preserving it from being developed. But we're not really doing that here anyway because it's not developable land that's going into the conservation easement. And so there's no real trade-off for allowing the 15 homes, of which, you know, are all encroaching, many of them are encroaching on upland review areas, very close to conservation easements, very close to wetlands. And in return for allowing that, we're not really getting that much. We're getting a conservation easement that is gonna be conserved anyway. So, sort of one big problem I have with it.
So your concern is with the density of the proposal for
Yeah,
15?
I think this proposal is all about finding a zoning loophole to get as many homes on this property as possible.
So I guess I would just remind you that you're the inland wetland agency, so you want to, this will be reviewed by zoning, and those issues that you've brought up will be part of the zoning commission's consideration and their purview. So you just want to be sure you circle back to inland wetlands.
Yeah, I
And,
mean,
impacts.
there's a lot of information in the briefs that were presented to us about what our authority is in terms of our review of the conservation easement, and we do have, you know, there are 5 criteria involved there, and the 2 out of the 5 that apply to wetlands are certainly under our purvey for review, according to what I read. Tell me.
Right, so you have your wetland regulation, and right, part of the zoning regulations refer to wetlands, but that doesn't mean that you can regulate, you can have authority, jurisdiction over the zoning regulations.
Okay, I mean, we're the Conservation Commission, and we're being asked to approve a 15-home development where there's a conservation easement. If you're telling us that we have nothing to do with conservation easements,
No, I'm just trying to.
I think that's a little, I don't think that's quite right.
Trying to provide you, your professional staff is trying to provide you guidance on the limitations of your jurisdictional authority. That's all. I'm not saying whether I disagree with you
But
or
I think that
not.
we do have jurisdictional authority over conservation easements. The last 2 out of the 5 requirements are how they pertain to wetlands, and do they, I can pull it up and read it to you.
Well, I think that what, well, maybe if I'm understanding correctly, what Alexis is saying is that as part of the conservation easement, they have to give up 50% of the property to be conserved, and then they get to work with the other 50%. So with that, they've come up with this proposal for the housing configuration that they have. And I understand your concern about, if you don't do a conservation development, maybe you won't have 15 homes. My concern is that I've seen so many properties that have been clear-cut when you think that it's going to be an individual house, but in order for them to build the individual house, a lot gets decimated, and it takes a while for things to come back. So if you go in knowing ahead of time that this area is all protected and can be, maintained, and where they're proposing is, for the most part, areas that have already been developed or semi-developed, I think that's what's attractive for this particular site about a conservation development. I don't know. I grew up in a street that had high wire tension lines going across it, so I know you can build houses near them. I lived in one all my life, so they could put houses there if they wanted to. Would they? I don't necessarily think it would sell anymore, but I don't necessarily think that high wire easement would necessarily preclude them from developing there.
Is there anything in the regulations passed to staff to address Bill's concern about the easement going across the property? Is there anything that precludes the use of that area as a conservation easement area due to any easement or
In
anything
the
that
wetland
you?
regulations, no.
So it will have nothing to do with the overhead wires.
Right.
So I even brought it up. Why even discuss? There's nothing to do about it.
But if it were all wetlands, let's say, that wouldn't make it more or less applicable for use as a conservation easement? That, in the
Not
regulations,
as
there's
far
nothing
as-
that says, for instance, it has to be developable land or something in our
You're talking
regulations.
about in the zoning regulations under conservation developments?
Either the zoning or in our regulations.
So the wetland regulations have no language regarding conservation easements.
So in the zoning regulations regarding that, is there anything that precludes the use of an area that someone might argue is developable or not developable for use as a conservation easement area? If something precludes it,
Don't do zoning,
then
but,
maybe we're going in one direction. Maybe if it's the answer is the other way, maybe we're going in another direction.
not that I'm aware of. I can,
You know?
I mean, in these, the various briefs that we were, given by interveners and some of the other stuff I've read through, there's 5, according to, now I'm talking zoning, I'm not talking, in the wetland regulations, but there's 5 criteria. At least one of 5 possible purposes have to be met. Okay. Number 5 are 4 is to protect streams, rivers, ponds as natural resources and avoid flooding, erosion, and water pollution. 5 is to preserve wetlands, marshlands, tideland, marine, wildlife habitats, and other areas having conservation values. And then it goes on to say, this is one of the intervener reports by Steve Danzer, right?
Mhm.
So the Conservation Commission has complementary jurisdiction to consider conservation easements as mitigation for anticipated wetland impacts. The statutory authority and interest regarding the designation and configuration of conservation easements coverage with the objectives of the zoning commissions in the last 2 of the purposes, number 4 and 5 stated above.
right, so what he's
And I
saying
can
is
read
that
you the other
those,
first 3, but I don't know
Right.
if that's relevant.
and so those 5 have to do with zoning, so as part of the zoning regulations, and it's clarifying to the, it clarifies, purpose and intent of that section of the zoning regulations for conservation developments. And then what Mr. Danzer is saying is that you, as the wetland agency, are looking at the impacts to the wetlands and water courses, and the activities that are causing those impacts to the wetlands and water courses that are either negative or positive, and can include mitigative activities, which a conservation easement might be considered.
Okay. So my point stands that what they've done here, or proposing, is a conservation easement that, they've carved out the minimal piece they can to get to the 15 allowable homes, right?
Right, so.
And it's shaped in kind of a weird way that kind of runs around the buffers of the property, and obviously through the wetland area up the middle, because that's going to be protected anyway, so they're going to put that in
So
the
you
easement.
just want to go back to what are the wetland impacts?
But so the
proposal.
result is the wetland, so the result is we have 15 houses that we're dealing with.
Right, but that's not an
And
impact.
the 15 houses are in
Right.
upland review areas, so, yeah, I think they do pertain to us. And
Okay.
as a conservation commissioner, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 homes that are in upland review area, and very close to, the average setback from the wetland is 62, 60, 61, 57, 57, 58, 67, 57. But that's to the wetland, and the setback to the easement areas is more like half that looks like, 25, 30 feet in most of these cases. So, we're being asked to build all these homes that are 25, 30 feet from conservation easement. Is that the spirit of a conservation easement? And isn't there a 40-foot setback requirement? I'm not sure about that, but isn't there a 40-foot setback requirement from the conservation easement?
Okay, again, you wanna go back to inland wetland impacts, so not
Yeah,
just the
okay,
15 or 14
so,
or 13.
okay, then we won't talk about
So
setbacks from
that's
the
just my
conservation.
point. It's
Zoning
like-
can deal with that.
Right, and so
But-
then, yes, within the zoning regulations, no building shall be permitted within 40 feet of a designated inland wetland or watercourse. And that's part of the zoning setbacks.
Okay, designated inland and watercourse. So I just mentioned that they're like, 60-ish feet from,
Right, so they're
from the
greater than
wetland,
the
but
zoning
they're still
requirement.
in the 100 foot
Yes.
upland review area, and this is a
If they weren't
very,
in that 100 upland review area, though, you wouldn't have any jurisdiction.
yeah,
Just-
okay. So my point is, there's now 15 homes, the maximum possible that can be crammed in here. It's in the upland review area, in a very sensitive area where there's a lot of trees and canopy cover that is, in a very important watershed area. I mean, we've heard many neighbors come and talk about the importance of this watershed. We've heard these environmental experts talk about it, and there's gonna be a lot of tree removal in this upland review area. There's gonna be, a lot of impact on this watershed to jam in these 15 houses. And,
Just- Okay,
so,
just trying to figure out the impacts to the
the
watershed.
impacts are, there's water runoff in this area, that, its flow is gonna be impacted.
But all that runoff is being diverted to the basins, and anything else that is going through water treatment. And they've accounted for the 100-year flood storm, so what they're trying to do is minimize any kind of impact. So they're redirecting the water. They are gonna put in those box culverts that were brought up by the, the interveners. They were concerned about how that broke the continuity of the wetlands. So they've agreed to put those box culverts in. So I think that they've done what they have to do, and that's how are they gonna deal with runoff? They said that, this area floods. It's a fact. I mean, the neighbor said it floods. But what they're doing by redirecting their water is to prevent any additional flooding. So, they're not adding more water into the system. So I don't,
Yeah, I mean, then there's these other reports that say that, that stormwater runoff is being directed into the wetland areas, and that's gonna adversely impact the wetland. So it's like,
yeah.
the interveners reports versus the developers reports.
Right, and everybody has, on both sides, you have expert testimony,
Yeah,
so it's,
Exactly.
you have to give
And the
consideration.
experts on the intervener side say it's gonna adversely impact the wetlands.
I hear what you're saying. Anybody have any other comments?
No, I'm okay with that.
I know that I would like, if this gets approved, I would like the split rail fencing or some kind of more significant demarcation between the environmental easement areas.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, maybe if they just put a few boulders there, so no one's gonna move them.
Right. I think the biggest concern is that you just want to prevent any kind of extension of a yard further and further.
Yeah.
Or, the erection of some kind of shed. just mysteriously
Are they
pops
allowed
up.
to put shade on the property?
I don't think
I
so.
don't think so.
I don't think so. I think that they, the applicant has really thought through, they're not putting in wells, the water's gonna be supplied by municipal water, so they're not impacting neighboring wells. They have sewer, not septic, so you don't have to really worry about any kind of subsurface contamination. So I don't see this as, I'm having a hard time finding like impacts.
I am too.
They've focused most of their development, especially where you're talking about, Bill, near the pond. A lot of that is, I mean, they're gonna be in areas where there's already existing buildings, and it's already a field. It's, you know, they have ornamental trees and things, but in this area, I think they're trying to work with what's actually existing conditions.
Okay.
I'm trying to understand what impacts that there are. I
Well,
don't.
I mean, it's,
What impact is there to any water course or wetland area by this particular configuration? That's what I'm having.
well, there are a whole bunch of trees that are being removed right in here within the upland review area.
Beyond that, though, if I focus for a minute on the wetlands themselves and the water course, what impacts will this development have on that? Whether it's, you know, obviously the developer is saying that there's none, but I'm trying to understand
Well,
any.
I don't think the developer said none. There are some direct impacts to the wetlands along the entrance to the property.
The entrance to the property, which, that's correct.
So there are some direct impacts. Just the-
But beyond that, the houses themselves, particularly near the pond, I don't.
Well, it's the deforestation that, you know, in an area that, where you've got tree canopy, it's all part of an ecosystem that is feeding into the wetlands here. I mean, it's,
But what direct impact do we have to the water course, to the pond?
well, there's the pond over here, but there's this whole area here, which is like they call it the vernal pond, and, you know, periodic flooding, and
Right,
there's
but,
a lot of trees in the air and canopy and shading, the natural
But there's also
ecosystem,
the
you
big
got part of
theater.
that.
I
And
mean,
it's
there's-
now gonna be, you know, 2 roads surrounding it with homes and their yards. It's a different ecosystem. And it could it be mitigated with fewer homes? And 1 road, say, instead of 2 roads? And if you go with fewer homes, do you need as wide an entrance? The whole impact of the whole thing could be less under the different plan. I assume, I mean, I haven't seen a different plan. I'm not in that position to propose it. But again, like this easement is about getting as many homes on here as possible, the 15.
right,
Oh, sure.
and then,
And then the associated road that's required, roads
Right.
required to service them, the wide entranceway that's required to service them, which means, you know, we know that all those trees are gonna come out of those wetlands.
I think they said 2 trees on the driveway.
2 big ones and small ones, yeah. And, I mean, that's why I'm curious about this subdivision poster. I don't recall it getting too much discussion during the public hearing, but,
What is that?
I guess it's what could be a subdivision. plan, it would, that has 10 lots, but that doesn't look like an easy thing to get approved either.
When they originally came up with their first proposal, which was over 20, my thought was to go with the individual lots. But when they had to recognize that they couldn't use the entire property for their density, came back with the 15. What I like about the conservation development is that it's contained. And then everything around it is a buffer. And what concerns me, and just in development, if that's their lot, especially on the outside towards the Westport line, they could really do anything they want over there because there is no wetlands. So if they wanted to take everything down, they could. So I can't disagree with you. They're gonna go for the maximum number of homes that they can put on this property. I think that's kind of a given. But on the other hand, if you put individual homes on, I have concerns about that. I have concerns that that's really gonna change this neighborhood. I have nothing else to say.
It's
No, I agree with you.
it's hard to say. I mean, I don't know. It could be worse, it could be better, but it looks to me like there's 10 plots on there. It looks to me, 3 of them are under the transmission line. A couple of them are mostly in wetlands. I don't see how that's gonna fly either. They've
You
got
also want to go back to the.
passage
wetland
rights
impacts.
through wetlands going on. What's that?
We just want to go back to wetland impacts, and so what are
Yeah.
the wetland impacts for the proposal? And then, when I look at the conventional subdivision that they presented as an alternative, and of course, there's an incentive to maximize that also. I see a road that's at the same place where the direct impacts to the wetlands are for the conventional, for the conservation development. I still see a road, and as that's presented, with additional direct impacts to
I mean,
other
I
wetlands.
can't imagine how zoning would improve that, because you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Zoning
6,
doesn't, it would be the
6
planning
lots that
commission.
aren't even next to the road, and you'd have to have like easements through wetlands to get to them. So, I think that there's a very good chance an alternative plan of the subdivision would be a lot less impactful.
It's my understanding that it meets all the zoning requirements, but it would need to be approved by the planning commission and you of the inland wetland agency.
Well, staff, what was, refresh me, or something, and the testimony about the impact to the pond, for instance? Trying to focus on the impact, if any, to the pond as a starter here.
One, you can go back to, recommend that you return to, you have a, again, the verbal testimony you can review if you want online. You have the reports from the Environmental Land Solutions LLC, and then you also have a I recall Mr. Danzer provided a written outline of his presentation as well. I know that Mr. Zimba did. Yeah, right, so you have two professional wetland scientists providing written comment, and then they also provided verbal comment. The applicants consultant do you want me to try to paraphrase these, or you want to just?
I would like you to isolate them
refer
because
back to
we're
them?
not making a decision tonight.
No.
I'd like to isolate it and take out of the 400 pounds of material, that which relates to the impact to the wetlands. So I can take another look at that and better guide me in making the decision.
So I look at the ELS report, page 5, which they have titled Wetland and Watercourse Impacts. That goes through what they believe are the impacts, best management practices, and then mitigation measures.
If you could isolate all this for me so that I could review it between now and maybe in the next meeting.
Certainly. And then likewise, Mr. Danzer's report is in roughly the same order as, no, his was not. But I will isolate in Mr. Danzer's report where he speaks of the impacts to the wetlands and water courses.
Yeah, in that regard, I mean, he's talking about, he goes on quite a bit about the importance of this whole property in relationship to the Stony Brook watershed. And, he says up to this point, the relationship with the greater landscape and watershed has not been adequately documented. In conclusion, the connection of the stream system to its outlet, the value of the downstream resource, the Saugatuck River, are factors that enhance the environmental value of the wetlands resources on the site, and therefore the importance of the site beyond the values and functions that were documented in the report by ELS. And specialized protection of this stream system is warranted, not only to maintain the existing functions and values of the wetland and stream system, but to maintain the excellent quality of the Saugatuck River. And then he's talking about the conservation easements, such the additional easement areas by their geographical configuration neither maintain the natural character of the area nor protect particular areas of natural beauty. More effort could have been expended trying to protect land that under existing regulation has virtually no inherent protection, i.e. the upland resources, which are also important to the ecology of the wetlands and of which will be in short supply if the property is developed. And then he says, this is sort of what I was getting at last week when I asked about why couldn't they move some of these homes over to here, and the whole transmission line thing came up. Alternatively, the developed portion of the site could be shifted and limited to the eastern region of the property. The area of units 11 through 15 could be placed under the conservation easement. And he was kind of getting at what I was thinking, but he didn't even factor in the transmission line thing, which wasn't really brought up and pointed out all that, directly by the developers.
So Alexis, activities in the upland review area, unless you can show that they impact the wetland or water course, that's really not within our purview to reject an application.
Correct. The wetland regulations are based on activities and their impacts to wetlands and water courses. As a way to assist you in regulating activities that more likely have an impact to wetlands and water courses, In your regulations, you've established an upland review area, but you don't regulate impacts to the upland review area. You would regulate activities that more often than not occur within that upland review area that have an impact on the wetland or watercourse. So if the activities within the upland review area do not have, if there's not an impact from those activities to the wetland or watercourse articulated or proven, then those activities stand alone.
And they're allowed.
Correct.
I don't have any other comments.
So we can close, we can move on.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add, or?
So,
I think-
My observations for the moment.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, I would say let's just move on. Go ahead and re-review the environmental land solutions report, probably the board's report, and then the
Interveners.
interveners report with Steve Danzer especially.